Fundraising used to feel like black magic. But now, with the current economic downturn, it feels almost impossible to get the influx of cash that early stage startups desperately need to survive. Bootstrapping to 10K revenue seems to do the trick as it increases your chances of getting seen by investors. But it almost feels like a chicken and egg situation. How can I get to 10K revenue if I can't build my product? You in luck. In this episode, I speak to the amazing Kris Jones, co-founder of Magic Source Online, a platform that gives visibility to underrepresented founders globally and reduces frictions between founders and investors. He's also a mentor at 3 accelerator programs and head of founder education at Diversity X. He's previously helped a startup exit as its chief of sales, taking them from 30 to 130K monthly subscribers in a year. Kris is the perfect person for this topic. In addition to bootstrapping and what startups founder can do to survive the storms, we will also look at how to attract, nurture, and get ready for investors. Welcome to the Mary Poppins of Startups live show. I'm Naomi Makambu from Athena Leaders. As a tech consultant and startup advisor, I will answer live the burning questions that you have on your journey to Series A+. Subscribe and tune in every week for top tips to meet amazing guests. And more importantly, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Kris, welcome to the show.
Hey,
I'm really
Naomi.
excited to finally have our conversation after weeks of discussing this. And there is just so much that we need to talk about. And again, as I've been telling you, I've loved the blog post that you've put out on Magic Source Online recently about bootstrapping. And I feel like it's time to really unpack that. But first, for those who might not have had the pleasure of meeting you or stalking you online like I do, can you tell us a bit about you and Magic Source Online?
Yeah, sure. I'm an absolute ecosystem geek when it comes to startups. Same as yourself. I love to absorb everything that kind of drifts through LinkedIn and across the web around startups, where they're going, the different trends and all that stuff. So I'm mentor at Carbon 13 and Raise Ventures and Black Valley, and recently, as you mentioned, heading up the founder education at Diversity X as well. So that's great. I love doing that. I love getting hands-on with startups, and that will never ever end. And I'm founder of Magic Source as well. So that was born out of a couple of frustrations. One was that founders seem to make the same mistakes in the early stages, and the other was that founders, particularly female founders and black founders, etc., found it more difficult to raise funding. And I thought there has to be a better way of doing this. So hence that's how Magic Source was born, to work with accelerators and solopreneurs that don't get access to accelerators to at least have somewhere to go, a home, an ecosystem that they can access that gives them the stuff they need and an ability to get investor ready and get matched with investors at the right time.
Yeah, no, that's quite exciting. I'm looking forward to the launch of the platform. And of course, if anyone out there in the startup ecosystem want to find out more, there's already a lot of resources and interesting information on Magic Source Online website, which I highly recommend that you also go and check out. Now, one thing that I really wanted to start with before we go into all of the other amazing topics is this idea of bootstrapping, which can be, which of course, it's something that is required, as you've mentioned in your blog post and in some of the posts that you had on LinkedIn, which was the inspiration for today's show. Yet at the same time, it's kind of difficult for founders, depending on their own personal financial situations before they started. And do you want to kind of unpack why you believe that bootstrapping to at least 10K revenue is really what people need to focus on right now?
Yeah, I think it's just the trends and the way it's gone, particularly since 2019. We've seen a decline in what we call first check in investing. So there's people who pay that very first bid into a startup. A lot of angels start to leave the ecosystem for various reasons, partially down to investing in companies that had AI and ML that didn't really have AI and ML, and not really getting a head around the level of risk associated with investing in startups. So the investor profile, particularly in the UK, is more risk averse. So a lot of them retreated into crowdfunding, being able to write lots of smaller tickets across a number of startups, and others just left it entirely. And there's a bit of a brain drain through that as well. So there's still lots of angels out there, but what we do have is probably about 20 to 25 funds in the UK that focus on pre-seed, actively writing checks. And when you look at the maths, only writing about 10 to 15 checks each year when you're talking about the funds. So I think the way startups have to raise and build has to change to adapt to the market conditions. So what it means is that founders have to find a way of proving concept and getting some kind of product live and executing on something to start to go through these stages to firstly attract potentially 3Fs or angel investment, and then going on to then potentially do a larger round, if possible. Other way, build a business from scratch to be able to get to that sub 10K revenue if you really want a chunk of change to develop faster and further. And that bootstrapping is the hardest bit, and you've probably seen this as much as anything else, because on balance there's probably more non-tech founders than tech founders out there, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's what makes bootstrapping very challenging. And in fact, I've even seen that. I was mentoring a startup with a tech founder, and what I found was that the bigger tech founder, although yes, it is a bit of a win, right, an advantage, as you can remove some aspect of how am I going to build a platform, or even who's going to build that. But the downside is the impulse in building or overbuilding without qualifying the market. Now, when we look at non-tech founders out there, it's even more difficult in a way, because at least that they do come with a lot of experience from the field, from the market, the connection and everything, but the understanding of technology is lower. And I have a tech background, but even myself, I would say I'm glad that I do a tech background, because as a non-tech founders, when someone comes to you and says, oh, you can do low code or no code or this platform and this React and this JS, and I'm like, oh my God, how do I choose? And more importantly, how do I choose the most cost-effective way to be able to build a platform and then to actually take it to market so that I can start testing and get to the 10K revenue?
Yeah, and there's the number that is so many founders don't actually do enough research at an early enough stage as well. I think that key piece around finding out the priority in terms of the problems you want to solve, which is more important to the people who will use it and pay for it. So you have to keep the dialogue up. You have to find and talk to your potential end users to find out what the biggest problem is for them that they will pay to get rid of. And that starts you off on either a development path, if you are able to develop your own solution through no code and low code, but I'll come on to that in a minute, or even building an offline proof of concept. I mean, I've had to take the medicine myself, as well as mentoring other startups, because I've had to do it with Magic Source. And we talked just before coming on air about me moving on to the next stage of my platform being proprietary after it being hosted in Google Classrooms. That was my route. But before I got there, I spent 8 months trying to no code and low code at least an LMS to be able to build that, to prove that concept. I looked at third party, which was just prohibitively expensive for what I wanted to do. And then just quite by accident, because the kids in the pandemic had been using Google Classrooms, I thought, can I use that for free? As part of my subscription. And I'd been sat with this free LMS I could have used for 8 months,
all this time.
all this time. But that again comes through all of the more you share, the more you have that peer interaction, that helps. And I think being able to seek other founders out is one of the biggest things you can do, and share some of your pains and how different people got through those initial pain points themselves, how they built an offline proof of concept. And, you know, it's worth bearing in mind that even with low code and no code solutions, you still have to have, I think, some degree of technical knowledge before you embark on that. And that way can lie madness unless you're prepared to really put the learning in. And then there comes the opportunity cost.
Yes, I agree. And even last week I was doing a mentoring session actually in Spanish, which is getting more interesting now. And it's about someone who's trying to create an ecosystem for entrepreneurs, especially startups entrepreneurs in Madrid and in Spain. We're providing there will be some kind of workshop and many other things. But it's really at the beginning stage of his idea, and he's trying to put an event calendar together, and he's trying to go on WordPress. And I sat with him we did the first part of what is the concept, what are you doing, when are you going to launch? He's like, oh, I'm like 3 weeks away. Why? Well, you know, on my WordPress website, I need this thing to fly up and come out here and do this. I'm like, you're not even a coder, right? But like, no, but I want it to be pretty and interactive. And I literally sat there, look at the code, and I said, okay, remove this, remove that, we're launching next week. That's it.
Execute on something. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, I think we did an episode on the no code for those who wants to kind of have a bit more information on that. But I believe that you need to look into that as if you are developing a software. The tools we are using for developing it is secondary, right? But if you do not have the vision, if you don't think about what's the least you can build to move forward, you're still gonna go round and round in circle and try to learn as much as you can about the tool. And then after that, it's either discontinued or then you have licenses to pay. But if you didn't think about all of that beforehand, you then find out and have a beta test at the end.
Well, that's definitely the whole point of a pre-seed startup as well, isn't it? Is being able to test and iterate and be agile, because the assumptions you go in with are so quickly blown out the water. And there's one statistic I've quoted ad nauseum over the years, which is most early stage startups. The stats bear out that a startup will soft pivot 16 times and hard pivot once in the first 18 months. And, you know, I've seen that play out so often across the accelerator cohorts I work with, and the platform you start with is not the product it will be in 18 months. And that's not a bad thing. That's because you're listening to your users. And I think being able to adapt to what your users want is the key to developing a solution that people will love and pay for. So this is why that bootstrapping journey is never, ever a bad thing. I think what it does is as well, it helps you focus as a founder on developing a business that knows how to commercialize early, that knows how to execute early, that puts the user at the front of everything.
Yeah.
So that you find that founder market fit that everybody's talking about that's so important. So you can bring their expertise to bear to get to a point where you can start that early commercialization, look after those people, build your net promoter scores with very little. And there isn't a single investor that wouldn't be dazzled by people who get to that stage. And it's how the funnel kind of goes at the moment, isn't it? There's 1 million people with just an idea. There's 100,000 with a product, and then there's 10,000 with revenues and a product. And you really want to be in that 10,000 with revenues and a product to have any chance of raising 6 figures.
Yeah, definitely. And just to play a bit devil's advocate here, I'm sure there's a lot of people, especially those who are maybe first-time founders and still at the idea stage, just kind of going in, and they are struggling to even conceptualize the idea of getting to 10K revenue. And I'm sure that a lot of the pushback I get when I talk to them about to startup mentors, or even what I've seen online, is that how do I sell a concept to the point of reaching revenue if what I have is broken?
That last bit is where people go wrong. What they have isn't broken, is it? So it's just rolling it back to you will have, if you've got any domain expertise or you've identified this problem at all in any way, then you need to go back to those people and say, look, how about I solve this problem for you manually, semi-manually at first, to take that off and understand. Now, if you start off by mainly doing service revenue to help solve that problem, again, not a bad thing. It's proving concept while getting paid, which always helps. And it's revenue. That it's at that point that you start earning revenue towards the business. And what you're doing is then you're trying to conceptualize that, what do I have to do now to turn this from a service-based business into a tech-based business? And that builds your route. And having that revenue coming in removes at least one of your headaches, like being able to eat and keep a roof over your head while you're actually developing that solution out, and nothing is lost because you're learning so much by interacting with the users and supporting them in that way anyway. And again, this is where I've had to take my own medicine with the Magic Source modules initially. I took those to the accelerators that I was working with and used those as a basis for some of that learning, and they used them and came back and told me when they were good and told me when they were really shite and needed rewriting. Nothing like the honesty of users.
Yes.
And I mean, from my own perspective, I started out with, as I say, nothing, and then went to a site builder. I think I used GoDaddy Site Builder and Google Classrooms. That was my tech stack for my MVP.
Very simple, but effective.
And this is where that interaction with communities really, really helps again. So this is why I love working with the likes of DiversityX and Black Valley and Raise Ventures, is there was so much emphasis on community and people sharing their issues, their wins, their challenges, that way everyone who's been through these different kind of sectors and verticals can share with each other how they did it. And I think there has to be an element of hustle from an ideation stage founders to be able to do that. But I think the best place to start before you embark on any of that is making sure you go through a canvas and suss out what your competitors did. You can learn from what your competitors did, because so many share how they did it. And so many started in the same way too, quite a lot of those bootstrapped. So you can learn from others and how they bootstrapped to be able to develop your own strategy to build your business out, to starting to generate three figure, then 4-figure, and then 5-figure revenues. And while you're building towards that 5-figure revenue, getting towards that 10K, that's when, if you build in public and you start to curate proper relationships with potential investors, then you can maybe even build up these smaller rounds that can help get stuff done as well. It doesn't matter if it's 50K or 30K. Work out what you can do with that money. Where would it get you? What's the priority? Where would you look to deploy that 30 grand that would make things move to a point at which you'd either see an inflection in revenue or an ability to raise investment and kick on to the next stage to take advantage of what you've done already?
Yeah, and the concept of building public is something that you also mentioned quite a bit online. Do you want to share with us a little bit more about what you mean with building public?
Yeah, I mean, unless you're a super secret deep tech company, which most aren't, let's be honest here. The amount of labels I've seen on people who've been called a stealth startup on LinkedIn or they're in stealth mode, and then it launches and you're like, shit, is that all it is?
All of the secrecy and you're waiting for the reveal. You're like, oh, is that it?
It's a disappointment. I could come out with a ton of analogies that would make that sound much worse, but the amount of women have said that probably in their lives to men is off the scale.
Yep.
But
yes.
but the fact is by building in public, you have a real opportunity to, even if you're struggling to find that end user, I think by using the power of network, by telling people what you're building and why from an early stage, you start to attract people who have an interest in that sphere. And even if, you know, they're not customers, they're not investors, they're still useful because they're coming back and going, well, I have that problem, I do this, I do that. You can uncover different sectors that this is a problem for, or a small pivot in the software could open up an entirely new geography or revenue line. So being able to tell people what you're doing, and importantly, why you're doing it, you start to get people on board from an early stage, and people get a sense of who you are. And I mean, this also loops into the personal branding piece too, because so many founders, you've probably heard this too, is they'll have the question of, well, how do I post on social media? When do I post on social media? What do I post on social media? If you build in public, that's taken care of, because that's who you are, and you're who you are, your mission, and why you're doing what you do really start shine through, and that takes care of what you post in as well, and start to develop your own personal brand as well as a company brand by doing what you do. So it's attracting the right kind of interest throughout. And even when you fail, people are scared of failure, and if you're scared of failure, you probably shouldn't be a founder. But it's being scared of posting what you're doing because someone will either nick it, or you'll fail, or show a vulnerability. And thankfully, those days of people who telling everybody that they got up at 4 a.m, ran 10 miles and ate bran for 2 hours while listening to business podcasts. Investors aren't so focused on picking up those kind of people anymore. They want human beings who they know are dedicated and passionate about what they're doing instead. So showing vulnerability is not a bad thing, because it shows that you have an ability to listen and adapt and change. So I think by putting yourself out there, people see a vulnerability. More often than not, they'll try and help you with it, rather than shoot you down or kick you in the unmentionables to send you further down.
Yeah, and I guess it's the same when people think about the fear of public speaking, and they always worry about what people will say about them, whereas the audience is probably looking and cheering them on for just being on the stage in the first place. And I think it's the same thing that's happening in the startup world. As a founder, your head is full of the negative of what ifs, what are they going to say, but then everybody else is like, oof, better you than me, right? Then, they don't really realize that.
Yeah, this is it. And everybody suffers from imposter syndrome. And if anything, by being more public and being occasionally vulnerable really, really helps with that, because what you understand is other people who are going to say, me too, I'm struggling with that too, or this is how you can help with this, or this is how you can do this. And you get, I guess, more support and positivity through you from being yourself than you do from trying to project a different image of who you should be. So don't be scared of who you are.
And I guess I also want to pick up on the personal branding piece and the posting online. Do you have any kind of questions that you send to people you're working with to help them think about basic pieces of content that can even get them started?
Yeah, I think it goes back to that canvas. I start at a really early stage when I'm talking to people. It's when you start to really iterate that initial canvas. When you're looking at your competitors, how you differentiate and why you do what you do, I think that's the point at which you really can start developing from a really, really early stage, who you are and why you do what you do. And I think that's one of the hardest things to copy. You can copy a product. Anybody can copy a product, but nobody can really copy you. They can't really properly clone you. And anybody who does try, eventually it's going to sound disingenuous. So
Yes.
I think by being yourself at an early stage and setting out on that journey, I think it's letting people know early that as you do your canvas, and particularly as you build an elevator pitch as well, when you're drawing the 6 M's of trying to be concise on what your mission is, your momentum, and your machinery, your management, all of those things. When you condense those into about 5-6 bullet points, that becomes the nucleus for your pitch deck, and should run through everything else you do like a stick of rock. So then you start to say, right, okay, I have this plan now. I've done a canvas. I know who my customers are. I start talking to my customers. This is the feedback they're getting. I start to share these things. So as you build out what you need to do to get to each milestone, whether that be a technical one, a marketing one, or investment one, at each of these learning points along the way, you can sort of map out, at least for yourself, a 6-month journey. And you go, right, well, these are the things I need to do over the next 6 months. So I'm going to share parts of this journey as I go along. So this is what I've learned from my customers this week. This is the problem they've told us about that they want solved. Is anybody else seeing this? Or would you bring any other problems to the party? Or you're not selling at that point, you're asking as well. And I think you start to then build up conversations. You get people start to follow you as you share some of the answers to those questions as well, because that reciprocity really, really helps too when you start to share some of the answers you've had from the people you've spoken to and the research you've done, because people will join in. And that's when engagement starts. And through engagement, you get more followers, you build a bigger audience. That network effect starts to fill out, and it's a pebble in a pond.
Yeah. And I also love the simplicity of, as you've said, starting with your canvas, your 6 M's, and understanding what your value and everything that you're bringing, and then translate that into your plan and the messaging that you're putting out there. Because I think that sometimes there's a lot of messaging online when it comes to just posting on social medias, right? Like twice a day, 3 times a day. Just even if you're gonna do it once a day consistently, as long as you have the information already written down because you thought about it, it's actually much easier than waking up and thinking, oh, I need to post today. What am I going to write about? Because I think that is very nerve-wracking. It reminds me of my experience. I mean, I have to be completely honest. I do not like social media at all. But I had to do it, even podcasting was a thing that was like, oh, how do I do that? But it was part of the strategy for my business. And when I first started, I was definitely one of the people who would sit down with a pen on their hand and go like, I have to write. And I actually love writing. I love journaling and all of that. But when you tell yourself you have to write, it's like your brain shuts down. And when you think about the fact that I'm here trying to write when I have other 100 things to do to run my business, it really doesn't help. So thanks for sharing your very simple strategy for early stage founders who are already absorbed with 1,000 things. How can you reuse what you've already created for content for your social media?
Yeah, and don't post unless you got something to say.
Yes. I wish a lot of people could do that. And by the way, thanks, Kevin Witten from Diversity X, and loving this conversation. Yes. Thank you.
Yeah, I love what Diversity X are doing. I think there's this shift as well. I think for those people who don't have networks, that may not have been born with a silver spoon up their arse that brings them networks and money that they can go to immediately with an idea. I think the more groups that spring up that support the outliers, those people who don't necessarily have those initial networks and don't know where to begin, and bring that support around them, I think is phenomenal. And I think that's the trend, because that's the majority. So I think we'll see more support and more of a more of a proper circular economy developing around the majority of founders who are underestimated, starting to build companies, starting to exit, and starting to feed that back into the ecosystem. So I think the dynamic of startups and venture capital is probably going to change significantly over the next 10 years.
Yes, and I can't wait to see that change and to even help support that change, because again, I love the work that you do, Kris, and also on your own as part of Magic Source Online and also as part of Diversity X, because I think that support is really, really needed. So the next bit I want to talk about is startups that think they should get funding, but they're not just ready. But before that, as a reminder to all of our startup listening to us, we do run monthly one-to-one product and tech mentoring sessions. They run that, I think it's the last Friday of every month. And if you have any questions, you want to play around with ideas, and you're thinking of bootstrapping and you're not sure about your tech stack and how to simplify it to avoid building something when you could have used other things that already exist, then do drop by. We love to speak to you. Now, on the topic of startups not ready for funding when they feel like they should raise, because of course, there's this idea of I want to grow my startup, I need money, but sometimes startups might not realize that they're not ready, and there is some prep work that they can do on their own, especially if they are not part of the accelerator programs. It might not always be obvious. Now, I know that you've looked at countless numbers of pitch decks and attended so many sessions. And what are some of the things that you see in a deck and you're thinking, oh, crikey, we're going to have to work over a few hours to kind of straighten this out?
My God, the worst ones are the 30-odd page, 30-plus page pitch decks. They're the ones that really, really drive you insane. And they really sell it beforehand as well. And yeah, you just think, look, I'm not even a VC. I'm not an angel investor yet. If I'm not willing to sit through 35 pages of it, then you can bet your bottom dollar somebody who's got 2.5 minutes to read a deck is not going to sit through 35 pages. So point one is be concise. So that's the one thing that stands out is try and keep it somewhere between, at worst, keep it 18 or below. And particularly if you've got little bits of information on some of those slides that just mean you're going to pop straight past stuff as well. So one, be concise. Two, I hate to sound like a broken record, but go back to doing the canvas and your 5Ms/6Ms to start from a concise place and understand your business. And then use templates. So, I mean, there's plenty of templates available on the web, but we do have one with a core structure that's in the free Versity section of Magic Source Online as well. So what you can start to do is build out the core of that deck and then iterate. So before you contemplate sending out to too many investors, look from those people you've met within the ecosystem, that those peer groups we spoke about as well, is share that with some of your friends and family, share that with some of the network of startup founders who are out there who's incredibly supportive, but will also be brutally honest about your deck. And it starts to refine it. Then when you do send it to investors, please, in the name of all that is holy, don't send it to everyone at once. Send it to a small batch of people. Look for consensus on feedback. If they say one particular slide is trash, change it. As long as they tell me why. And then work on an iterative approach. The other thing is don't go for funding too early. If you're at concept phase, again, unless there's some earth-shattering idea that can be proven out within deep tech, then you're pretty screwed for getting money that early anyway. So don't do that. And I think they're the core bits. Everything else can be semantics, particularly in early stage. There are so many, and you see this too. You go on LinkedIn and you'll see 5 angels saying, "Oh, I'm sick of decks that are this font and orange. Don't ever send me a deck with this font and this orange." That's not a requirement. That's a rider. That's an ego. They're probably the people who want fucking blue M&Ms in a dish next to them if they do a fireside chat.
Yeah.
So there's a lot you can ignore out there. I think is keeping to the core principles of being able to be concise across your 12 to 15 slides and using as few words as possible. Use infographics where you can, and don't go too text heavy. The reason you write a separate business plan is so people can read that if they want detail. Be high level.
Yeah, I've been to pitch events where people try to maximize the space that they have on a slide, to the point that, well, as you're talking, you only have 2 minutes as well. There's not enough time for people to read, and we're sitting at the back, we could barely glance in and read. So if you're speaking to a room of investors, and those at the back won't even see what you're putting down. So what's the point of having to way too much information?
Yeah, TMI. Get rid of TMI. I mean, those founders that listen and can adapt are the ones that do iterate a deck and move on. The other key things you don't want to see on there are a deck that's dated last year or a version number on anything. The rest of it comes down to actually testing with the audience. Some people just simply won't like your deck, and you just have to like it or lump it, because they don't like the design style, they don't like you, they don't like your logo. If they don't get it, they don't get it. It gives you some thought to go away with, maybe around the branding, and am I talking to the right audience, using the right kind of communication? But some people will get you straight away, some people won't. It's like the law of averages with sales. 10% of people will always say no, 10% of people will always say yes. And then it's about trying to convert the 80% in the middle, through building a solid value proposition.
Yeah.
Why would somebody be interested? What problems this solve or align with for them as an investor?
Yeah. Thanks to Kevin's message, they are the ones who are not focused on learning about the business, which I think refers to when we're talking about the different colors on the slide, which actually this triggers an interesting question that I have for you, Kris, is, of course, we are looking at startups that are not ready for funding, but is there anything that you would like to advise startups as well when they are finally to the point where they are ready for investing? What they should look for when they go and approach investors, because sometimes there is one part, one segment. I see a lot of people who feel just grateful to have had an interview with a firm that they feel like, whatever you want, whatever you say. And others, I remember, I've seen that on LinkedIn. There was this woman, she loves to write a post whenever she did a call to action to investors. She ends her post with something like, we've opened our rounds, you might miss out if you wait too long, right? She has this tone of voice that is very much like, I know I'm good at what I'm doing, I love my product, you might miss out. So what do you say to kind of encourage startups as well on their approach to investors with a lot more confidence about what they have?
It's do your homework. Weirdly enough, again, I did another blog on this yesterday as well, and some do's and don'ts around approaching investors. Goes back to I think the point I made just recently as well, which was, don't send it to everyone blindly. Don't carpet bomb everywhere with your deck. Do your research on the investors, no matter whether it's a fund or an angel. Actually get to know them, get to see what they like. Shipshape VC's tool is super useful for that. Daniel Sorko's really like that, because what it does is you tell them what kind of sectors you're looking to invest in. It brings up the socials of different investors where they've mentioned things that may be of a common theme to, so you can actually see what they're outputting on social. So for somebody like me, I would obviously look for things like diversity as well as founder tech. And therefore you can start to see people who are aligned with you, who are on that same mission as you, to start to understand them and build relationships early. build reciprocity, because it's not just a one-way street. The investors you talk to, you have to remember they're human as well. So, and they get swamped. So if they don't respond straight away, then tough, wait a little while and give them another little poke. If they don't respond, then that's fine. They have their own lives too. You don't know what's happened in that life. So when they come back and it's a no, politely ask for feedback and help you iterate. Otherwise, sort of leg up and move on. So don't be an arse when you're approaching investors. I think that's a key tip. Make sure you're building out to profile these people. So there's loads of profiling tools. And again, that was in the same blog post yesterday. That's available to everyone. So there's plenty of tools out there that help you now shape your approach, that help you look for people who are interested in your sector and ticket size. So you can take a lot of that legwork out. So you can see, right, well, these, and quite a lot are starting to get quite prescriptive, either angels or funds, and they say, I'm really interested in this sector. If you want me to read your deck, these are the kind of things I want in it. And this is the specific kind of stuff I'd like to see from the startups that I invest in. So the more homework you do, the less work you do. Sounds perverse, but I think if you dedicate probably 6 to 10 hours at the outset on building a profile of the type of investors you want to attract, I think that way then, you know, a smaller group of people that you're actually taking this proposition to, who are more likely to understand and engage with your offering. And you've already then set out to build a relationship rather than a transactional request for investment.
Yeah, and I see that it's like pretty much the same as if you wanted a certain profile of customers for your business, especially when we're looking at B2B and the cycle is quite long. The amount of time that you spend up front to really understand the clients, what they're about, although it might feel like a waste of time, but it's actually time well invested. It is going to pay out in the future. And I think that's the same approach as you're talking about, Kris, when it comes to approaching investors as well.
Yeah, it's the same with anyone, isn't it? It's two things have always been present, I guess, in my working life. One is reciprocity. So people who do me a good turn, I always love to do a good turn for, and I'll always do a good turn first without the expectation of reciprocity. But it's nice when it happens and it comes back. But I think if everybody helped each other out a wee bit, the world would be a much happier place, wouldn't it? And the other is making sure you're building a value proposition. So either what problem are you solving for someone, or why would this be of interest to someone? What would be the incentive for them actually engaging with you? What do they get out of it? I think if you start from that perspective rather than what am I going to get out of it, it's easy for desperation to creep in as a founder, really easy. But I think the more you think from the other person's perspective, the easier that becomes.
Yeah. And in fact, another point I will add to that in terms of the communication with investors, because this tip is probably with everybody, going back to what you've mentioned a few times about being concise and making sure that you really understand your proposition to be concise. It reminds me of, I was working with a client, we were putting together a bid in Future Match. I think you might know Kufa. And I think it's even just going through the bids, place is quite great. And I think we pair up really nicely together. As you know, I tend to take the technology, the product aspect of things, and ask him questions until I can get him to reduce the number of words and say, this is what we're going for. And thanks God we do have word limits, because sometimes you can just go on forever. But I think doing those exercises like writing a pitch deck that is concise, writing, pretending that if you're even pitching, even if you don't have a pitch lined up and it's concise, really, really helps. One thing that, as much as I love spending time with, just entrepreneurs in general and startups even more so, when I go to a networking event and I have to sit through 5 minutes of someone telling absolutely everything. All I said, hey, how are you? What are you doing? And it feels like, especially in Spain, like a telenovela. I started my life here when I was young. I'm like, can you first just give me an idea and then you can go in and start enjoying the conversation?
It starts to feel like a hostage situation sometimes, doesn't it?
Yes. And they get wine on I need to stop crying.
Will I ever be let out again? I mean, Kufa's a fantastic example in what he's building, because that's not a simple SaaS solution either, is it? So, but being able to accurately and concisely say what that does, I think, you've done some fantastic work with him in terms of helping bring that proposition round into something short and punchy as well. And I think as a founder, I think we're all guilty initially of trying to tell everyone everything about our favorite kid.
Yes.
And you see the home pages, they reflect that. The first homepage everybody knocks up, guilty too. There's this just big word shit down the front page that is probably about a 10-minute read, and then you just got to redact. It comes back again to, that's important to me. Is that important to people who are seeing it? No, it has to make sense. And it has to be short. You have to be able to say very, very few words. This is what I do. This is how it solves the problem. And that's how much it'll cost to get that problem to go away.
Yeah, no, definitely. So one question, I've been notified by my team in the background that we've got a question for Twitter. She's just sorting that out. Oh, there it is. Balancing personal sacrifices with the demands of bootstrapping a startup has been incredibly challenging. How have you personally coped with the sacrifices, and what strategies can you recommend? So this is a question that just came in via Twitter.
Mental health is super, super important. And I think you have to set time. There are boundaries. That's what I've helped to cope with. But I've come across so many founders when mentoring that literally some days have been on the verge of tears. And you tell them to just go away, turn your phone off, and get outside, find the nearest green space, leave your phone in the house, and sit and chill and just listen and watch everything around you and blank your head out. And I did the same. I mean, personally, everybody's different for the things that will help them switch off, but you need to have this clear demarcation where you put the phone down. The world will not stop spinning when you put your phone down or your laptop down. Millions of customers aren't going to come trampling through your platform in the 1 hour. And whoever's waiting for a response can probably wait for a response, particularly in evening time and weekends and stuff as well. So you have to be firm on yourself and care about your mental health, to put it one side. I've suffered with depression on and off for 10 years. So it's something that I always have to carefully manage. But I love getting out into green spaces with my co-founder / missus and the kids, and that time is mine, and they all make sure it's mine. My phone is off, it stays behind, and I'm absorbed in them and what's around me, not my work. And I think you just have to make sure you have that clear demarcation and that time where you do switch off. It's a psychological thing quickly. Yeah, and I read this the other day, was that your pre-conscious, your conscious, can process things at about 15 to 18,000 things in a minute. Your subconscious can run through about 245,000. So let it do its work. Let your mind actually switch off. Let your conscious switch off. Let your subconscious even just whir away in the background without having the distraction of what's going on in your conscious mind. Because the amount of people who've actually gone and walked away for an hour or spent a bit of time away from their business and come back with more clarity and ability to cope with what's going on around them is immense. There's a ton. So listen to your mind, listen to your body.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think this is one of the hardest lessons I've had to learn. When I first started my business, it took me a couple of years to be able to go on holiday or even just for a weekend and leave my laptop at home without having withdrawal symptoms. And I feel like, oh my God, I'm a bit naked right now. Where is my laptop? It's kind of an extension of my body. But it's incredible what you've said in terms of just being able to go away. It's just I think last weekend, the weekend before, I went into a village. Now I'm actually trying to visit as many villages in Spain rather than the big cities, which I think is great. But the culture is really in villages, in my opinion. And yeah, I left, and when I got on the train, I thought it's a couple of hours to get there. But I left my laptop at home. I'm just missing out on those 2 hours. I'm like, what are you actually going to do about those hours? And I left my laptop because I knew there was going to be a moment where those thoughts will come into my head, and I will take it out and I go, I've got 2 hours. Yeah, look at me. But now this is actually what I needed, because I felt saturated, and it was nice to go. And I came back, and we did a lot of random things and village things, which was really interesting. We actually went to see a clown, and we were front row with all of the kids. I thought, it's been such a long time starting a clown. But it was great to do all of those random things, and also enjoy the nature. So I really really agree with what you said about the mental health aspects of looking after yourself, especially when you're taking on building your startups, bootstrapping or not.
Yeah, it's one thought occurred to me one week, and you can either find this amusing or not, but this is my dark brain. But is I looked at my tech and I thought, this is Stockholm syndrome. I'm starting to develop an affinity with my kidnappers, because my tech are my kidnappers. So
Yeah,
way is that fear of missing out. You're developing that on yourself, and doubt.
yeah, yeah.
As you say, a lot
Definitely.
of different set of problems, but I think in those early days, no problem solved by burning yourself out.
Yeah. And to the question that was asked as well, I would say the second advice would be to go out and find a community that can support you. We've talked a lot about, of course, Diversity X. Kris, you're part of so many accelerators that have great communities behind them as well. So if you are bootstrapping and feel like you don't know where to start and you want to have a chat with someone, then I will highly recommend you join those communities. They will have events so you can go to virtually these days as well, and ask the questions so that you can have even more dedicated answers rather than just struggling on your own.
100%.
So it was such a pleasure having this discussion with you, Kris. You shared a lot of gems, and as I said before, I spent a lot of time stalking you, and I'm hoping that those who have those who have listened to this can also do the same, as you do share a lot about the work that you do, and also you are one of the few people I love on social media, because you always promote the voices of others as well, which I think it's very commendable as well. So, if for anyone want to find out more about you and Magic Source, what do you think is the best way of discovering you?
Yeah, obviously LinkedIn is where I'm most active, as you know, and we share our blogs there. You can find the site at magicsource.online, where our socials are on there as well, so you'll be able to find the page and me. And there's a ton of blogs, free resources, and everything else on there too. So probably the best place to start there.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you. And thanks to Bridget's comments about, I think it's good for all human beings to take some breaks without this computer or phone. Definitely. But thanks again to anyone watching. Just a very quick reminder before we go, we do run tech and product metric sessions once a month, the last Friday of every month. So get in touch. If you are stuck, any question you want to ask, I do come with a bunch of other mentors depending on it is that you are struggling with. So we're always here to help. And in addition, as we discussed in this session, yes, the land out there in terms of fundraising might be difficult, but there are you can do to bootstrap and also to support, to get the mental support and emotional support whilst you are going on this journey, and different ways of generating revenue. So if you wanted to find out more or discuss a little bit more about any of the things that we've spoken today, do reach out to me, to Kris, and I will also be more than happy to connect you with all of these amazing communities, because I think that there's a lot of gold out there that I'm sure you're not taking advantage of. But in the meantime, let's design a happy and productive workplace playground together.